So what I have for you today, ladies and gentlemen, is a rare bit of good news, and I'll tell you what it is because obviously I'm a finance guy who works at the Lotus Eaters. I've got a sort of foot in two camps, one in the reactionary right-wing sphere where we're talking about these awful ideas such as remigration and having borders and not seeing people stabbed in the streets and all those sort of other awful things that the Labour Party is keen to arrest us for. And but I've also got a foot in the sphere of the financial markets, being my background and frankly where I actually get most of my income from. So I keep alive to both. Now, obviously, I think, and if you're watching this channel, you may well also think that remigration having borders is probably a good idea, and I think it's going to happen. But then I've got sort of bias on this. I mean, this is also what I want to happen. So it's quite pleasing to start to see from my other world, the finance world, the view from outside of my bias. That is exactly what is happening. I'm going to take you through this tweet that was quite interesting. So this is from Andreas Stenos Larsson, who is a finance guy. He's big on the Real Vision channel, which is a sort of paywalled financial sort of YouTube type thing. Where they look at markets and he manages money himself and so on. And he's actually quite good. His returns are pretty decent, actually. And he attended recently this conference full of, as he says here, PMs and CIOs. So these are chief investment officers. So the head investee type bloke at investment firms and portfolio managers. They came together and had a big conference. And the takeaways were genuinely quite interesting. So here he says, four main takeaways from an audience of CIOs and PMs today. The era of tariffs is permanent and will only be reinforced by advances in AI and robotics. Remigration is set to become a pan-Western political theme. And for swing voters, inflation now clearly outweighs climate concerns. Europe is 3 to 4 years away from being led predominantly by right-leaning governments, and that trend will reach us soon after. I'm not exactly sure who he means by us soon after. I mean, presumably Scandinavians, because he is one, but he has a primarily US audience on his Real Vision thing. So I'm not sure which one, but then I suppose the US have already got a right-leaning government, haven't they? So you must mean Scandinavians. Now, this is quite interesting because it's obviously what we want to happen, but it's nice to see that this is sort of emerging in another sphere entirely, and especially this one. And I'll tell you why. Is because if you are an investor, you're paid to live somewhere between 6 to 24 months in the future. You are bad at investing if you're going off today's news. You've got to allocate your capital ahead of time. That's how you get returns. You've got to live in the future. Now, a lot of retail investors, they try and make money by reacting to whatever is in the headlines on that particular day, and then they place their bet. If you are doing that, you are almost certainly exit liquidity for somebody like me or somebody like them, because you're reacting to the thing that has happened, and then you are exit liquidity out of our positions. Whereas if you're doing this properly, you have to get good at living in the future and seeing what's coming down the track. So these are the views of people who are actually quite good at making this sort of distinction between, what is actually likely to happen towards what is not. And these people are the top of their game. I mean, they would have been filtered out of their firms, many years previous, and would not have risen to senior positions if these were not the characters who were good at spotting what's coming down the track. But I wanted to break it down a little bit. So first point, permanent tariff era. I mean, what does that mean? Well, basically the globalists have lost. So, I mean, you only need to go back to the 2000s, where the growth in international trade was sort of 7% a year. And now it's under 2%. So there has been a big drop in this spread of globalization. which in turn weakens all the globalist institutions, the Davos and the UN and so on, if this globalism track is one that we are moving away from. And tariff barriers are up 600% since 2016, so when Donald Trump came into office first. And that's primarily of tariff barriers going up between the US and China, but it's a bunch of other things as well. The US has tariffs on Chinese EVs, for example, of 100% at this point. Europe has tariffs of about 40% on Chinese solar panels. So the era of globalization and the globalists, it looks like it's petering out at this stage. It's not reversing yet, but it most certainly is petering out. And what do we mean by the next part of that? Because I want to unpack all of this, because there was a lot of gems in here. The only reinforced by advances in AI and robotics. Well, the big driver for globalization in the first place was, okay, well, we can get cheap wages in other places. It's a lot cheaper to get your manufacturing done in China or whatever. The problem is that Chinese labor costs have tripled over this period. So since I think since 2010, Chinese labor costs have tripled. So the labor argument, I mean, it's still there and it is still strong, but it is reducing. The other factor, of course, is energy costs, and I will come back to talk about that in a minute, because I think we've got something coming up. Oh yes, we've got the net zero stuff going away, and the AI bit is important as well, because it used to be the case in old world where you needed somebody of a high level of expertise who was doing a thing, industrial capacity or whatever it was, to come and set up a version of you and large amounts of capex to do it on some. In the era of robotics and AI, that learning curve to enter new industries is going to significantly reduce, meaning that the West can get back into industries that it has been out of for quite a long time. Things like semiconductors. There was a reason why South Koreans dominate it. It's because they've got all the expertise, and that expertise has withered in the US and Europe, and therefore it's difficult to get back into it. AI and robotics will reduce that significantly. I mean, to give you one example, the Germans have started using robotic arms in their factories, which replace the jobs of several workers, and they cost about 25,000 euros to put in, and they work 3 shifts in a day every day, and they don't join unions or go off sick. So that is valuable for the onshoring and combating the high labor the relatively high labor costs in the West as opposed to these. I do also have to touch on energy as well, because I think that's missing from this tweet. I don't know if the guys discussed it there, but they should have done. Cheap labor is just one part of the problem. You also absolutely need to address the energy problem. And I think an idea that I'm going to start pushing soon as I thought it through properly, is we need to be thinking not just in terms of GDP, not just in terms of GDP per capita, but energy per capita. Because the more energy that you have to do stuff, the more stuff that you can do. And put it like this: in China, the energy per capita is about 7 megawatt hours over the course of the year. So about 7,000 kilowatt hours per person. In the UK, for example, it's only 4,000. So, China has overtaken us in energy, meaning that they can do more. So over longer term, they will start to exceed us on the other metrics as well, including GDP per capita and so on. And the West is really going to have to address this. It's all very well having robotics and AI, but you're going to need a lot of energy if you're going to actually do stuff. And energy is absolutely crucial, because it makes up anywhere between 40 to 70% of core industries, things like steel production or concrete or chemicals. Very energy intensive businesses, and you can reshore them. You can end this era of globalization and being dependent on your enemies if you basically get your act together. The other thing that they were talking about is the net. Well, let's cover the remigration. Do it in order. Europe's population growth since 2010 has been entirely driven by immigration and immigrant births. The populations of Europe, the European population, the European origin populations of the US, they are all declining in favour of other origins, of other people. I will come back to that. But you look around Europe, you're seeing AfD polling at 24% in Germany. You're seeing Le Pen in France, her party, but not her herself because they banned her from standing, but her party. They're leading in the French polls. Geert Wilders, of course, won in the Netherlands. I mean, he's run into a bit of recent difficulty. But Sweden Democrats are starting to dominate in Sweden. This is all going away, and of course, Reform are set to win. I mean, almost every seat at the next general election. The main parties, what we think of now as the main parties, Labour, Tories, and Lib Dems, are looking at being wiped out. And again, the people who are paid to live in the future see exactly that this is happening. I'll return to the bit on inflation beat climate change, but these nonsense ideas have discredited themselves. I mean, I remember as a young man being told that I'd never see snow again. Being told that the Alps would become snowless, that the ice caps would melt. Well, I mean, all of those things, the opposite has happened. The ice caps are regrowing, and yet we're being taxed ever more for this nonsense that clearly doesn't work. And again, the people who pay to live in the future, they see that this is it's just lost its traction. I mean, essentially what they're saying from an investment point of view is that ESG is done. The rotation of capital is going to be onshoring industrial capability and energy, robotics and AI. It is not going to be promoting ESG bloody nonsense anymore. I mean, this is winning after winning. And lastly, that Europe is going to be led by primarily right-leaning governments. I mean, good again, winning. I mean, I've talked about some of the polling coming through in Germany, France, and the UK, in Sweden. So, I mean, this is all starting to take place, and I just think it's reassuring from outside of our bubble to see people who professionally live in the future to confirm that actually it looks like we are on track to win politically at just about everything. Whether those, soft right governments that we're putting in actually can deliver is a different question. But things are at least beginning to move in our direction. I also wanted to talk about something else while I've got you, because obviously I've got quite a large American audience, and there is something I genuinely want to ask you. I want to get your assessment on. So I've been looking a lot at demographics lately, and I've just recorded a Brokenomics, in which case which I go into this, and I did a segment on it recently on the podcast, and I've just been looking at the things like share of global population, and you can see where we started in the 2000s here. This is a decent number of Europeans. We called a majority. If you live in the US or the UK, we get called a majority. Actually, the Anglosphere is it's 6% of the world's population. If you add in Europeans as a whole, it's 18% of the world's population, and for some reason we're called a majority. This of course, we are in the Asian century, so North Asians, China, Japan, and so on. 26% of the world's population. South Asia, India, that sort of part of the world, 20%. The Islamic world and Africa is down here at sort of 10% respectively. They actually started this century fairly low, but the birth rates in Western nations has been absolutely collapsing. So, giving an example, in Nigeria last year, more children were born than in all of Europe. In Ethiopia, more children were born than in all of the EU. Basically, white populations are not replicating; they're not having children. And it's not just white population. Japan, South Korea, they are plummeting even faster. They are wiping themselves out. Anyway, you roll this ahead to something like the end of this century, and you can see the difference. The European population goes from 12% of the world down to 3. The Anglosphere goes from 6 to 3% of the world's population. And look at the growth. The Africans, they go from 10% of the world's population to 43%. And the Islamic world goes from 10% to 17%. So the next decade is going to belong, the next century is going to belong to the Africans and the Islamics, unless, those of European origin overthrow whatever system it is that is killing fertility and actually start to replicate ourselves. Anyway, the thing I wanted to ask Americans is, I put out a tweet on this because I'm getting more and more interested in this, and I said, look, the 1900s was the European century. I mean, it's a tweet, and I want to make the first tweet so that it fits on people's timelines. I didn't have space to write what I actually said in the episode, which is European origin and the Anglosphere. But that group was 30% of the world's population in the 1900s, and we built civilization science with it. And the 2000s, this century, I mean, it belongs to the Asians. They've got 52% of the world population. What are they doing with it? Well, they're copying IP. And I'm just asking the question, when it gets to the next century, which is going to belong to the Africans and the Islamists, what are they going to do with their century? Genuine question. What are they going to do with their century? What achievements are they going to bring to the world by dominating it? And by 2010, only 3% of the world's population will be European. And I thought, that's just what the demographic trends are showing us. That's what the question that I got for Americans is, I then immediately had an American getting upset with me and saying, I'm sorry, who did the 1900s belong to? Basically making the point that, Americans do everything. I mean, they do a lot of stuff. That's true. They don't do everything, but they do a lot of stuff. That I don't have a problem with that. And look, basically, I'm saying, well, look, what is the ethnicity of the Americans doing that stuff? I mean, yes, it was done in America by European stock Americans. That's kind of the point I'm making. And anyway, we then go on to have a bit of discussion. I'm just sort of left scratching my head about this. And he's saying, look, we don't know if identifies ourselves as Europeans. And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. But Americans are not a distinct ethnic group. There are different groups within America that make up America. And it's like, do you genuinely identify with an African American more than somebody from wherever? I mean, I don't know whether this guy is of Germanic or British or whatever ancestry, but do you really identify with an African American more than you do with the average member of whatever your homeland is, your blood kin, as it were? And he's like, well, yes, I do actually. Yes, I do. Basically, we have this discussion. It's like, well, I do think that is a bit of a one-way street. And my question to Americans is this: do you genuinely consider yourself divorced from your ethnic roots? Do you really see yourself as identifying more with a fellow American who comes from Nigeria or the Middle East or whatever than you do from somebody of your own stock who didn't get on a boat 150 years ago? Is that genuinely how you see things? And do you genuinely believe that is reciprocated back the other way? Because I mean, I've got to say, and I'm not an American, so fine, your opinion trumps on this. But I look at somebody like Ilhan Omar, and I think what I see is somebody who very clearly identifies as Sudanese first and American second, and wants to do things for Sudan. I look at that Mendami chap coming in New York, and I think he sees himself as Islamic, and will advance the interests of Islamists, not all Americans. So I just want to know, and tell me in the comments, if you are American of European ancestry, do you see yourself as detached from your European ancestry? Do you see yourself as just one big melting block? And do you think that is going to get reciprocated in the future. Because look, your founding fathers, they all described themselves as British throughout their writings until later in life when they started calling themselves Americans, understandably. But I think the reason why you have the institutions in the country you do is because it was of British stock and they thought in that way. And even as recently as 1900, you were an 88% European origin country. And you're going to finish this century being a 40% European origin country. Does that concern you in any way? Does that, or does it simply not matter? Or do you just all see yourselves as, you know, the bond with an American of a completely different lineage is more important to you than your connection to wherever it is, you know, whether it was Britain or Europe? Is that just more important? I'm just genuinely curious because I want to do more on basically the white birth rates, the European birth rates, the Anglo birth rates, and about how if we don't change things, we are going to encounter significant difficulties in the coming centuries if something doesn't turn around. And we really need to think about how we address this in the future. It would really help me pitch these ideas to our American audience if I could understand where your head is at on all of this stuff. So, you know, slight tangent from the win thing I had at the beginning, but I just want to know where your head is at, whether you see it as a problem in any way that you know, America is rapidly becoming not of European origin, or does that just not matter to you? And actually, pushing back on any connection to Europe is actually far more important. Love to know. Anyway, with that, take the win. If you're American, I'd be grateful for an answer for my question, and see you later.